I mentioned in the introduction to this course that Node.js is not just for building web servers. However, that is one of its most common purposes, and it does have a module dedicated to web servers. And so in this lesson, we are going to look at creating a web server. I've created a file called server.js, and what we can do is get the HTTP module. And creating a web server is really easy. We can create our server by doing http.createServer. And the most common pattern is to pass createServer a function. And this function will be called when a request comes into this server. And the two parameters that come into this callback function are the request object and the response object. And so now, inside of our function here, all we have to do is respond to that request. And we can do that by doing response.write, and we can write anything out. So for example, I can have an h1 here, and I can write hello node. And so the write method will write that out. And then when the response is done, I call response.end, and that response gets sent. Now we have to start up the server, so we can say server.listen, and we want to listen, say on port 3000. That is all we need to do to create the most basic web server. So now back in the terminal, I can do node server.js, and notice how it's just kind of hanging here, because the server is running, waiting for a response. So I'll open Chrome and head to localhost port 3000, and you can see we have hello node being printed out. Now, of course, even the most simple of web applications will have specific routes that you want to handle, and you can get all that information about all the information you need about the request on the request object. So for example, request.method will tell you whether it was a GET request or a POST request. Why don't we just add that here? Let's say response.write, and we can have a paragraph, and we'll say method, and we'll say request.method, just like that. And of course, we'll restart the server. And now if I refresh the page, you can see that we used a get method here. We can also do something with the URL. So let me just copy this line and let me say URL, and we'll change request.method to request.url. And of course, we restart the server again. And now if I refresh the page, you can see that the URL is just /, or I can type in some URL, and you can see that we get the entire URL given to us in that property. And so you can use these properties and others on the request object to figure out exactly what's going on with the request so that you can make a more appropriate response. Now let's look at another way to create a server. I'll create server2, and this time we won't pass createServer a callback function, because really all that happens is that callback function is added as an event listener for the request event. So we could do this manually by saying server2.onRequest, and we pass this function with the request and the response parameters to this on event listener. Now what we're going to do in here is, again, a little bit different, because the response object here is actually a writable stream. We can write to that stream. And so why don't we get our file system API here. So we'll say var fs equals require fs. And then in here, we can do fs.createReadableStream. And let's just get our server.js file here. And then we can actually pipe this to the response writable stream. And this is actually really handy when you have a lot of output, or in some other way want to output a stream. You can actually just pipe a readable stream into the response writable stream. We can do server2.listen to 3000. And once again, I'll restart the server. And now if I refresh the page, it seems that we have an error. So if we go back to the console, undefined is not a function. Oh, and the problem here is if we look back at our file here, I said create readable stream. It's actually just create read stream. Okay, so we correct that, restart the server. And now if I refresh the page, you can see that we have our server file printed out to the page here. And of course, this will work for no matter what route we put in. So you can see that it's very easy to treat the response object as a stream because it is a stream. Now, most of the time when you're creating web applications with Node.js, you're not going to use a raw server in this way. You're probably going to use something like Express, which is a really popular and very, very easy to use Node package. However, I think it's useful to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. And once you are familiar with Express, maybe you come back and try and create a smaller version of Express from scratch using the native HTTP module.